Well, hello, everyone. My name is Eric Massonet. I'm a professor here in the Bren School of Environmental Science and Management and also in Mechanical Engineering. And it's really my great pleasure to be the moderator, super easy job for this session on the energy transition in the food supply chain. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce our panelists, but I've also been asked to talk a little bit about what we do here at UCSB and specifically through the Institute for Energy Efficiency when it comes to the energy transition and also for this important sector of food processing. So we have an initiative here, which is called the 2035 Initiative, and it's pretty unique at universities in the US or probably even globally. And the basic model is we're coupling really rigorous analysis of industrial and energy systems with action-oriented policy scholars and thinkers so that the numbers and analyses we generate can be translated directly into policies at the state, the federal level, hopefully to move the needle on decarbonization. So the 2035 Initiative is presently comprised of about 15 different faculties spanning economics, engineering, environmental management, psychology, law, political scientists. We have a large staff now. We have quite a few students who are engaged in the initiative alongside with fellows. So some of what we'll talk about today relates to a critical initiative that we have here under 2035, which is helping industry with proactive policies that can accelerate a transition to clean energy. And with that, the way I'd love to start this session is to quickly hear from each of our panelists. Maybe take a minute or so, introduce yourselves, your company, and tell us a little bit about the part of the food value chain that you work in. And I'll start here with Jesse.
Yeah, thank you. Jesse Tutel, Director of Research and Development at Lineage Logistics, now called Lineage. We're the world's largest cold storage REIT. So we're giant frozen warehouses. We have about 480 sites across 19 countries, and that's over 220 in the US. And you can think of us as the kind of a time machine for the food supply chain, right? We're B2B producers that come up with the food, need to store it somewhere. Go into our giant frozen warehouses. You can think of these as like a Home Depot kept at 0 degrees. That's a typical site, pretty energy intensive, somewhere in the order of 1 to 4 megawatts per site. And we have about 40% of the food supply of the frozen food supply chain in the U.S. So if you have eaten out of a freezer at a grocery store, you've had some food that's gone through one of our warehouses. And looking forward to talking about kind of our energy and sustainability efforts.
Good morning. I'm Steven Cisak. I'm the VP of Operations at Los Gatos Tomato Products. I've been in the processing foods industry over 20 years, and specifically fruits and vegetables, specifically with Los Gatos, 11 years. At Los Gatos, what we do is we process tomatoes only, and then we process it into tomato paste. And then that tomato paste is used to our customers who's going to further concentrate it to their products. So your pizza products that you see on the shelf, your ketchup products out there, barbecue sauces, anything that has tomato base in it, that's what they're going to use. With us specifically, we have a 90 to 100 day operation. We're taking in all those tomatoes. We'll concentrate it. So basically all we're doing is crushing the tomatoes and taking the water out. We're going to aseptically seal it, and we're going to put it in large totes. These totes are 3,000 pounds, or they can go into 55-gallon drums. And then whatever our customers prefer, they're going to take that product. So we will store the product on site for the year, and then we'll just ship out throughout the year to our customers until the next season when that all comes out.
I'm Daniel Hartwig. I think most of you guys already, I saw most of you guys here earlier, but for those of you that weren't, I'm the president of the California Fresh Fruit Association. We represent growers, packers, shippers, and other associated businesses in the fresh fruit industry. So think table grapes, stone fruits, cherries, palm fruits, pears, all kinds of delicious goodness. Anything you see in your, any good, piece of fruit you see in your, grocery aisle, that's probably not on the frozen side, but some of our stuff actually does end up actually in the frozen chain, but most of it is in the fresh side. And I neglected to mention earlier, I actually farm as well. And where Don was talking about that $55 water, I think it's actually going to go to like $88, next in the next year or two, because they just had a 218 election. But I also farm in that same water district, and so happy to answer any questions kind of on the farming side from that. But again, representing growers, packers, shippers, and and I guess as by way of more information, I was a director of sustainability for a large farming corporation, or large family-owned farming operation before I took on the job as president here.
My name is Robert Dika. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the Primex group of companies. We are the third largest vertically integrated pistachio company in California. We farm pistachios, we process pistachios, and because we're number three, 95% of our sales are to export markets, from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, because our larger competitors have pretty much cornered the U.S. market. So what I want to focus on today is some of the operational and financial challenges that are faced by California food and agricultural companies. And I also want to talk a little bit about innovation, resilience, and the fact that even though there are a lot of challenges facing companies in California, that the amazing ecosystem that the Golden State has built will more than compensate for anything that we're faced with, especially if we work together. Private enterprise, government, the university system, and the farmers and entrepreneurs that have built this amazing industry here.
And I did forget one pertinent thing to this conversation. We do a lot of processing of inbound food volume. So blast freezing, especially, is one thing. Warm product coming off the field, it's got to get frozen. We also participate in that, and we do have some stone fruit coolers as well. Throughout the California basin.
Appreciate that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for attending today. So you can see we've got coverage of the entire value chain, specifically here in California, but also more broadly. And, I think the way we're going to run the session is I was asked to give a few context-setting remarks, which I'll do now. We're going to have a little bit of discussion between the moderator and the panelists to dive in a little more deeply on some of the issues we've already raised, and thinking about the energy transition as our key context. But then we'll also make sure we have plenty of audience Q&A towards the end of the session. And it's going to be my job to try to keep us on time, right? So I'll be brief in these remarks. So we've heard a bit about the different aspects of the food value chain. If we take a step back and we think about the food and beverage processing industry, and we think in terms of energy use, overall energy use and carbon emissions, we all know that carbon emissions are driving a lot of policy, a lot of commitments among companies, a lot of technology development, some of which is occurring here at the Institute. But if we take a step back, we can see that food and beverage, certainly not the largest contributor to industrial greenhouse gas emissions compared to some behemoths like refining and chemicals and iron and steel, but it's an important sector, and it's one, as you'll hear today, that I think the margins aren't always very large. Energy is really critical to profitability, but it's also one that's becoming the increasing sector of focus, essentially. I'll jump back to that in just a moment. Maybe I should talk about it now, sorry. So it's become an increasing sector of focus for local, especially here in the state policymakers, but also federal policymakers. I was asked to also comment on this broader trend of digitalization that is affecting all sectors of the economy, but in particular, it's being deployed more and more in the food and beverage industry to seize efficiencies, to optimize logistics, optimize irrigation schedules. And we also do work here at the Institute on understanding the energy demand of data centers and where AI is taking us in particular. And we do know that the application of AI could bring a lot of great benefits to the economy, but the data centers and the internet infrastructure that facilitates AI is also becoming a hotspot when it comes to energy demand. So perhaps in the Q&A, we can talk a little bit more about that balance. And if you're interested in learning more about UCSB's research in this area, we have a poster out there in the hallway. But let's get back to the industrial sector. And One thing that I think everyone in the audience should understand is that the industrial sector is very complex. The steel industry is different than the concrete industry. It's different from the food and beverage processing industry. And even within the food industry, there are many different variations of processes that you'll hear about. And in general, when we think about long-term decarbonization goals, we all know we need to get to net zero by mid-century. Most plans to date, including those that have been proposed by the US government, tend to have only gradual decarbonization of the industrial sector. That's partly due to the fact that it's considered hard to abate often. A lot of equipment that you will find in an industrial plant or on a farm has a high capital investment cost. It'll be around for a long time. It's very difficult to just wave a magic wand and switch those facilities over to something that is perfectly renewable or low carbon. There are some processes that are hard to decarbonize. In addition to that, it's a really critical sector for our economy and for jobs and for national resilience. So all of these factors come into play, where we see that industry, compared to some other sectors of the economy like transportation or buildings, tends to have a much slower decarbonization curve. And the reason for this panel is we want to talk about what we can start doing to move the needle here in the food and beverage sector more in the near term. Another thing to understand about most of what we'll discuss today, especially in the food processing part of the value chain, is that there's a lot of low temperature heat. So this is a lot of steam, a lot of processes that don't necessarily need to run at 1,000 degrees like we need for making cement, but rather, this is the kind of heat we use in our homes, right? For cooking on our stoves or in our ovens. And there are a lot of technologies that are appearing, heat pumps, electrified steam, boilers and so forth, that we think could really help move the needle to accelerate decarbonization of this particular sector. And I'm going to close with this graph, which we'll discuss a bit more in the panel, and we'll just leave it up there because I'd love to get the panelists' thoughts, and I'm sorry that you have to crane your necks. But essentially, what are you looking at? So this is the U.S. Department of Energy's Industrial Decarbonization Roadmap that was issued around 2 years ago. So they looked at key subsectors of U.S. industry, one of them being the food and beverage processing industry, like you see here. And the plan lays out the grand goal of getting to net zero, or very close to it, by 2050. And then what are the key technology areas of technology deployment that need to occur? For this particular industry, it's mostly energy efficiency, so getting more useful product out of the energy into industrial plants, but also switching fuels, primarily electrifying key processes and ideally running on renewable energy. Not so much carbon capture like you might find for industries like steel or chemicals. So I'd love to keep this up in the background, and as we talk about the successes and challenges that each of our panelists has seen in the industry, we'll circle back to some of these technology opportunities, and we'll close by talking about some of the innovations that might be necessary for the food industry to achieve this vision, or maybe there's a different vision that the panelists would like to discuss. So with that, what I'd love to do is turn it over to our panelists, and I'm going to start with Daniel. So Daniel, you've described your role as president of an industry association, so you've got a broad view of the industry. You interact a lot with innovators, policymakers, and so forth. So can you give us a sense of, maybe even with this plan in mind, what you see as some of the successes that the overall sector has had to date, and what do you see as some of the challenges for, getting to net zero, adopting renewable technologies, switching over technologies in the coming decades?
Yeah, I think some of the successes, it's actually really difficult, right? Because as you stated, a lot of our business is very capital driven, right? And so you can't just say, well, hey, we're just going to electrify every tractor and just call it good here or something like that, and we'll do that next year, and it's just an easy transition. Or we're just going to make you incorporate every vine, tree, whatever you've got, incorporate those right back into the field. There's a lot that goes into doing things like that. So I think there has been successes. The Healthy Soils program, for instance, in state of California, has been good at encouraging people to incorporate whole orchard recycling and some of those processes. So it's good that we're accelerating that, but it's nowhere near the cost of how we used to be able to get rid of trees and vines. It's in some cases 4 times as expensive. And it doesn't those programs don't come close to actually compensating you fully for for what you're doing. So and there aren't, if you're looking to try to get carbon credits out of those kind of processes, most of the carbon credit, schemas are based out of the Midwest. And so you're looking at like, the soybeans and things like that. They have a lot of data and a lot of good data on, carbon capture in those types of commodities. But we don't have any, they're working on it, but there's not a lot of great data for carbon capture here. And there's not really a great way to monetize any of that. So you're looking at a higher cost of, doing that process of getting rid of, and incorporating, trees and vines. But you're not actually getting any more dollars to do that. So that those are kind of the, hits and misses, I guess, of that, piece of it. But I think regulatorily, there's a lot that's coming down the pipeline that some folks here maybe are aware of, but a lot of folks might not be aware of. I mean, you have things like electrification on zero emission commitments on like trucking, yard trucks, all these types of things that are going to have a huge impact to our businesses. Because we all rely on trucks for transportation. I mean, you've got to get, if you're picking a load of grapes and you're going to take it to the cold storage, whether it's whether one of Jason's or one of ours or whatever. I mean, you still have to have a way to get that to the field. How are you gonna charge all these things? There's not a lot of great data as well of where there is gaps in charging. I'm going to make this a little bit more participatory here. Just throw out some numbers here. What do you think? How long do you think it takes to get like if you put in an application to PG&E and you want to get like a new well or new service put in for PG&E? How long do you think that takes till they're ready to hook you up there? 5 years, 5 months, what do we got? Yeah, and I mean. Yeah, it's a multi-year process, right? And that's just even like for a well, right? Which is not a huge demand. If you're trying to like electrify your, if you need a truck charging station, you're talking about the amount of power that's required to, power a small city potentially. The grid, can't handle that, and so we have a lot of these mandates that are, coming down the pipeline at us, and it's more like instead of looking down a pipeline, you're looking down the barrel of a gun, essentially. I mean, it's that scary for a lot of our communities and a lot of a lot of growers and a lot of people that are in the industry. So, Stan.
Quick story. My sister lives in Gulfport, Mississippi. She knows somebody with a truck fleet of about a dozen vehicles. He wanted to buy electric. He said, "Well, I got a replacement in the next 5 years." He went and started talking. There is no way until the state of Mississippi is going to build 150 miles of grid up to the generator. Oh, by the way, the generator used to be bigger too. Right? To get it down to this kind of rural part of Mississippi. And she said, "Well, that's never going to happen, or at least not for 10 or 20 years until the feds pay for it."
Yeah. So it's a huge challenge, I guess. And I don't want to monopolize all the time. Just, I'm not sitting here trying to complain. I'm trying to kind of set the stage, though. There's a lot of mandates that are coming, but those mandates are either kind of unfunded or there's just not the technology or the distribution to be able to get the charging capacity there. And I mean, that's not even notwithstanding, they're coming out with new the ARB wants to come out with new regulations on tractors, now potentially a tier 5 tractor. But why would I switch to a tier 5 tractor when probably right behind that is coming, electrification of tractors? So, I mean, you have a lot of these policies and regulations that are being set, but they're not matching up with the reality. So I'll try to end a little bit more positive spin on some of this. So we, as an industry, we are trying to work together with CARB, with the CEC and put out surveys to growers throughout the state and say, here are our gaps. Here's where we need to have more distribution and more power available. Because right now there's just a huge data gap in where there are shortages of power and where there's shortages in distribution. But I looked at the survey and I put my grower hat on as I was helping kind of vet this, and it's going to take probably 45 minutes to an hour plus on top of every other burden that a farmer has to do. And I'm really curious to see how many people actually have the ability to sit down and take the time and actually fill this out when there's no tangible benefit for them. So those are some of the challenges we're facing here. So that's my positive spin, is that we're trying to actually gather data, but a lot of this data really should have been gathered by the state probably years ago before we started actually mandating a lot of the things that are coming down the pipeline. So
Thanks, Daniel. Oh, I should turn this back. Thank Daniel. I forgot to clarify. So in this chart, we see that, the business as usual, the second column graph there. So that reflects a lot of the things that the industry is already doing, investments that they've made. But half of the challenge is electrifying this particular sector. So I'm going to turn it over. So thanks, Dan. You summarized, I think, maybe the on-the-ground challenges and barriers associated with achieving this broad vision, which is really critical for actually realizing what needs to happen. So I'm going to turn it over to Jesse. And as you're representing, your company is a huge player in the cold storage industry. So I would imagine that involves lots of electrical energy, lots of technology investments, and you also have an international perspective in addition to what you're seeing here in California and in the nation. So I'll pose the same question to you. So for your part of the value chain, what do you see as some of the successes that are working to help us bridge to more clean energy and technologies, but also what are some of the challenges you're seeing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot to discuss here in more than 5 minutes. I think a few things to focus on are there have been some great successes in terms of on-site generation, renewable energy generation. Lineage is a Climate Pledge signatory. We're the 5th largest corporate deployer of solar in the U.S., and that's one thing we're proud of, and it's certainly a lot of progress. There's still a lot more room to go, right, on that front. I think you touched on electrification. That's one thing that's coming around the bend for a lot of people. And in our position, we're a third-party provider of logistics, right? We don't own the vast majority of trucks that are going to come into our warehouse and drop off their food. We're essentially being, by these CARB and South Coast Air Quality Management District regulations, for example, we're being penalized for emissions of trucks that are on our property that we don't own, right? And so we're being incentivized to invest in infrastructure, charging infrastructure, which, by the way, for a fully electric truck, for context, one of our sites of roughly 2 to 5 megawatts, if we charge every truck that comes onto our, property during a given day, that more than doubles the electrical load of our building, right? And, 2 years, 3 years, that's somewhat optimistic depending on the utility you're talking about. Up to 5, LED WP, some of the smaller municipal ones take even longer. That has pushed us towards kind of trying to plan for that, but also figuring out ways around, the utility infrastructure in the short term. Investment in things like on-site generation, microgrids, controls, doing more with the load we already have access to, right? If we can be more efficient, if we can reduce the energy consumption of existing processes, we tend to think about energy in kind of 3 dimensions. One is, can you reduce the amount of work you already have to do, right? And blast freezing, which I mentioned, is a great example of that. We have a bunch of strawberries coming off the field in Oxnard, and they need to be frozen. Some basic design principles and infrastructure investments can take that blast freezing time from 100 hours to under 30, right? Or, we can do more, do the same amount of work with less energy. That's fantastic. But we're reducing the amount of thermal work we actually have to do in that process. Next up is, the efficiency side. One big thing, I don't think it can be done without controls and data visibility. Big proponent of that. Research development guy, data science guy, not terribly surprising. We have a couple partners in the room, Jason Martin's lab and Crossnow K, who do an industrial controls platform for our refrigeration system, where there's a lot of decisions that can be optimized by a computer, and that's not possible for human beings to do, even if they had the time to do it, right? If you had guys whose only job was to look at these IoT-enabled devices, which is another part of this, right? There's a prerequisite infrastructure investment to be able to see what you have from an equipment perspective, to operate it remotely or to operate it smartly. And then on top of that, the investment in the controls piece is something we've spent a lot of time in, and trying to make things more efficient, the way they are. But, that led us towards, the other piece of this, which is pricing pressure, right? Especially in California, the utility rates have gone up an average of 7% a year, over the last 5 years. Sometimes that happens in 12 to 14% jumps. That pushes us, even if we wanted more power, it's going to be more expensive power continuously through time. And that's also pushed us in the direction of microgrid development, which we've spent some time on, aggregating together different assets, solar, battery, on-site generation, things like mainspring linear generators are technology we're really bullish about. That's a very efficient on-site generation technology that's also fuel agnostic. So, how we're planning kind of for that net zero roadmap is looking down the road for things that are currently natural gas. Maybe they can become hydrogen later on. But there's a lot more work to do in this dimension. And I think that in general, trying to adapt to the regulatory, asks that are coming around the bend is, it's something that may land on someone's desk and may take 5 years to do, right? There's a 2025 rule. If you didn't start it in 2020, you're not going to be able to do it in 2025. But as much as we can do to kind of plan and look ahead, that's sort of what we're focused on.
Thank you, Jesse. So you mentioned some additional challenges with at least the pace of electrification, but also maybe some split incentives when it comes to your part of the value chain. But I was really happy to hear about some of the efficiency successes, that first area of needed transformation in the blast freezing, but also you left the door open for maybe even more efficiency gains through future investments or innovations in controls. And don't worry, in the next round of moderated questions, we're going to talk about the solution space. But with that, I'd love to turn it over to Stephen. So your company recently installed, so you're a processor, so you're at the final leg of the food chain before it goes off to the consumer or to the final product manufacturer. And energy is a big cost driver for you. And recently your company invested in a key energy efficiency technology, something known as a mechanical vapor recompressor. It's essentially a heat pump, heat recovery technology. Can you describe for us, your company's motivations? Well, first of all, tell us a little bit about that technology for the layperson in the audience, and then give us a sense of why that was a key investment for your company, and maybe some challenges you see as a processor for further improvements moving forward.
Sure. So backing up a little bit. So again, back to, we have a small window to process. So in that small window, we're harvesting 1 million tons of tomatoes. With that 1 million tons of tomatoes, remember, we're concentrating it. We're turning it into about 350 million pounds of tomato paste. So like Eric was saying, very energy dependent. There's a lot of therms that take place. We made the analogy to the cooking earlier. So with the tomato factory specifically, you're using large industrial boilers to put the heat into the system, and that's how you're getting that evaporation process out there. So just like at home with your small, water heaters out there, we just have a large one on the industrial scale. Our fire boilers will run 500,000 pounds of steam per hour, and that's what we're driving, what we call our evaporator systems. So in our plant, we have 7 evaporators. The newest one, like Eric said, was the MBR that we put in. Evaporators, again, we've been doing this for a while. Just like on the chart up here, we try to get efficient every year. With the normal evaporators, they're all multi-stage evaporators. So basically you're reusing that energy over and over. So we're putting primary steam in, and we're going to reuse the vapor on it. We're going to collect the vapor, reuse it in the next effects. Typical multi-effect evaporators is 1 to 3 efficiency. Basically, you're getting the pound of steam that you're putting in, you can evaporate the equivalent of 3 pounds of water. So when you get into newer evaporator technologies, with the MVR specifically, what you're going to be doing into that evaporator first, you're actually going to compress the vapor steam and then put it into the effect. And then you're essentially reusing that vapor over and over. So we're having steam that drives our turbine to compress that, and then we're going to reuse all of that energy. So like I was saying with the evaporators, which was a 1 to 3 efficiency, the Thor technology and the MBR specifically is a 1 to 20. So that's how we're getting that efficiency out there. When we started looking into the project out there, we didn't want to add to our boilers because, again, the more gas input that we put in there, they run off the natural gas, it's going to boost your load out there. So with the Thor, it could run in our footprint. So as we're analyzing projects out there, this one could fit into our system. We use it as a basically pre-concentrator to our lines to just take that initial water lift off, and then it goes into our process out there.
Thank you, Stephen. So, Robert, I'll turn it over to you. Last but not least, of course, your company is making quite a few investments to increase productivity, which leads to efficiency improvements. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've done, and also maybe comment more broadly on the challenges that farmers and processors at the very beginning of the food value chain face when it comes to adopting renewable energy or new low carbon technologies?
Absolutely. And just want to preface it as a lot of people in this room know, agriculture and food processing is a very, very low margin business. So at the same time, the pistachio industry has seen tremendous growth over the last, 30 years, especially California pistachios. So my company, about 3 years ago, we went down to 50% capacity increase project. We added some hullers, dryers, new silos to try to maintain our market share in the space. So as part of that expansion, we needed more natural gas for the hulling and drying portion of the processing, and we also needed additional electricity for that 50% capacity expansion. The gas company told us, no problem, we're going to install a larger pipe to bring in more natural gas for your hullers and dryers. Don't worry, we got you. PG&E on the electrical side, again, we gave them 3 years notice. They said, don't worry, we got you. All we have to do is put a larger transformer at the substation. Don't worry, we got you. The gas line, we saw them digging it up, and it was actually ready for us about 6 months before our harvest season. PG&E, about 6 months, and we had weekly calls with them, and they said, don't worry, we got you. Okay, 4 months before harvest season, don't worry, we got you. I'm going to cut to the chase here. About a month before the beginning of our harvest season, PG&E was, well, we're not going to be ready for you this harvest season, but we're definitely going to be ready for you next harvest season. Okay, and what do we do this harvest season? Sorry, can't help you there. Figure it out. The next week, they said, well, we looked at our numbers. We're not going to be ready for you next harvest season. We're going to be ready for you in 2 years. Okay. Meanwhile, we started reaching out to mobile generator companies because we had a pistachio crop to process. The following week, they basically said that they're not going to be able to give us the incremental energy by 2028 and perhaps beyond. This is in 2023. So again, I leave the politics and lobbying to the more charismatic and well-spoken members in this room. I just need to deal with the crap that is dished out to us by either Mother Nature or Sacramento or Washington. So we put our thinking hats on. The generator rental was not something that was done very easily, because then CARB came in and said that the generators that we put on site were barely compliant, so that we couldn't use them next year. And that's where the collaboration in the community came into place. I met the gentleman from Scale Microgrids, who are joined us here today. At a trade show, I believe it was either in Monterey or Sacramento, and he looked pretty lonely. He was there in a booth, and he looked bored, and my heart kind of went out to him. So I struck up a conversation, and long story short, basically this scrappy young company that emerged from an East Coast power generation family-owned business, basically said in a very humble and non-salesperson-y way that we'll take care of you guys. And I said, well, I've heard that before. PG&E said they were going to take care of us. And they said, well, we're Warburg Pincus, which is one of the largest private equity firms in the world, I guess had enough confidence in our technology and our people and our skill set to, put their capital behind us. So They basically offered us a turnkey solution that was going to replace up to 100% of our power needs, including during harvest, which, like the tomato industry, is about a 6 to 8 week period per year, at about a third of the cost on a per kilowatt hour of what PG&E promised us but wasn't able to deliver. So where am I going with this? I'm going with this that, the business needs, again, as an accountant, as a finance person, they are what they are. I can't change Washington. I can't change Sacramento. But what we can do as a community is work together, collaborate. The Scale Microgrids folks introduced us to a consulting firm called Momentum, which helped us apply for some California Energy Commission grants. And I'm proud to say that through that collaboration, we were able to get a $5 million grant to help us with this project. So, and surprisingly, the people that we worked with at the California Energy Commission, instantly responsive, some of the friendliest people in any sector, not-for-profit, for-profit, government, some of the friendliest people that I've ever worked with, and they just absolutely wanted us to succeed. Okay? Which is quite probably the opposite experience that people have with various government agencies or utilities. So it was a win-win situation for everybody. It was a win for the state of California because, we have between 500 and 1,000 jobs at any point in time of the year. That's, 500 to 1,000 families that, our company helps provide for. It was a win for the finance industry because one of the fastest emerging financing vehicles in the world is so-called green bonds. And I had attended, I'm not going to name the university, but one of the UCs down south. They had a presentation on green bonds, and the premiums that green bonds have because of the excess demand are in excess of what normal corporate and government bonds. So the marketplace, the cruel corporate global bond market, views green bonds as a more safe and a more higher rated investment vehicle than corporate bonds by, well, Boeing is a bad example, but let's say, Orange County, well, that's maybe a bad example too. But anyways, the top bonds globally that you can imagine. So the need is there, the will is there, and we just have to continue to work together to surmount these challenges because, again, we're feeding people, we're creating jobs, and it's in everybody's interest for us to work together, collaborate, use new technologies, use new systems, use new software, use artificial intelligence to, make food affordable and sustainable.
Thanks, Robert. That was a perfect segue to, I think, the last question I'd love to ask of each of you, and it relates to the path forward. So you've articulated certainly some challenges in getting to net zero, but what I heard in all of your remarks is that you found ways of innovating, you found ways of moving forward on key technologies, microgrids, private partnerships, controls, MVR, and so forth. So I'd love to ask each of you, let's put on our optimist cap for this last stretch, but also be real about, what it's going to take. So if we were to achieve net zero emissions in each of your segments of the value chain, whether it's your company or the whole value chain writ large, what's it going to take? Do we need more technology innovation, for example? Do we have the technologies and we need more technical assistance? Does it come down to policy? Does it come down to new innovative partnerships? Does it come down to finding a brand new way to solve the problem? For example, just bypassing the utility altogether and going with the microgrid. So any of those, all of the above, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And maybe I'll start at this end with Jesse, and we'll work our way down back to Robert. Tell us what you think. What's it going to take to achieve this broad vision?
Yeah, potentially a very long answer. I'll try and keep short. I think that the ideas are out there, to start with. We have a lot of productive partnerships with universities and government agencies. There's a lot of people thinking about how to solve these things. It's about that next step towards application and coming down the price curve, I think, is a huge one. The investment tax credit as part of the IRA was a huge advance, and whether or not that persists, things like that, I think are a huge requirement in order to actually get technologies and innovations in the hands of actual companies that want to use them. Bridging that gap, part of that is also funding. For you mentioned CEC grants, federal grant funding. I think that there is a hard pill to swallow for a lot of companies, which is that there is a necessary investment in baseline infrastructure in order to get these more advanced solutions, right? You can't manage what you can't measure. You can't control what's not connected to the internet. And you need to be able to see all these things in order to do the more advanced solutions, down the line. The running joke for us for a long time was the Internet of Things doesn't work without the internet, right? Like I can't see what's happening right now. I think that the more productized a lot of these technology solutions become, the easier it will be for people to adopt them, right? We're fortunate in our position to have a research and development team, right? We have bandwidth, we have time to look at new technologies, invest in them, vet them, try them out, and then try and scale them. That's not super common, I imagine, in the agricultural sector, right? To be, not just the time, but also the capital and, a team of people maybe dedicated to something like that. So the more that, private collaboration or collaborations between, early adopters and early stage companies can help develop product market fit, I think that benefits the entire industry. Certainly collaborations with things like EEI and research collaborations are a huge part of that, figuring out what the best application for things is. For us, our roadmap looks like physical reductions in energy to the maximum extent possible, right? There's a lot of people out there that are talking about credits or other things. I think that those are final stage solutions. So reducing, like I mentioned, the efficiency projects, reduce the amount of energy you need to the maximum extent possible, maybe start generating some of it yourself with solar or other renewable sources, then start moving to, off-site solutions. We're looking at, virtual power purchase agreements, for example, things like that. When you don't have space or you don't have the capital to build your own solar array, look elsewhere for it. And try and minimize that last possible gap, of financial mechanisms, right? Buying credits. A lot of people get accused of greenwashing. That's a whole nother conversation, but, there are valuable carbon credits out there that are real and do actually mean that you're making an impact. But we want to try and minimize that to the maximum extent possible, right? Do all the things we can towards that sustainability journey ourselves, and then, kind of fill in the gaps. I'll keep going. I'm sure we can kind of bounce around this topic.
Yeah. Thanks. Over to you, Stephen. So what does the path look like in your eyes for food processors?
Yeah, perfect. No, it's just like some of the panel members up here already mentioned, Robert specifically, just those partnerships out there. So like with the CEC out there, you need those extra edge to help you get the projects like we did with the MVR. Obviously, it's a high capital investment, so you need a little fund supporting that. You need a little bit more support in the background. They'll be able to link you up with people, engineers that are thinking outside your current box, but able to work inside your box as well, because everything's going to be connected. There's many solutions out there, but it's getting third-party companies involved with that. We're looking into our boilers, electrifying them, but then you run into different challenges, right? So right now we run per day, we're pulling 5 megs per day during processing season from PG&E. That's supplied to us from a substation. If we get into the electrifying our boilers, we'll have to pull in 60 megs. So again, what is that? Is that another substation? No, we've talked to PG&E. They actually have to put in a transfer station, and then it's like, okay, what's the solution beyond that? Like we're saying, that's good for me for 90 days. What do we do the rest of the months in the year after that? So, there's a lot of opportunity out there, but we got to work together, tie them. There's thermal batteries that can supplement and assist us. So it will knock us down quickly, but again, it's gonna take that working team out there across the board, and it's you can't just put that capital just like on the, let's say myself processor specifically. Guess what? We're not going to be able to survive in that effect out there.
So we need quite a few stakeholders and actors at the table, for sure. Daniel, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, everything comes down to money, right? I mean, so, we've had a lot of great successes in the Valley, working with the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District and NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Services through USDA, replacing a lot of equipment, whether it's on the water side to improve efficiency in irrigation, but, replacing equipment, right? So, tractors, you talked about, how long farmers drive tractors. I mean, I remember, hell, I think my grandpa still had a tractor that was, from it was a Massey Ferguson, 355 or something like that from, from the 60s or something like that. And we just, I remember being a kid and helping rebuild the engine, put new sleeves in it, and off you go. That's just what you do in farming. You kind of just refurbish and go, and you just kind of, you keep equipment going because it's really expensive to go out and buy, to buy new stuff. But those kind of programs, they come in and they'll pay you, it's roughly 35% of the cost of buying a new tractor. Or you might be, if you don't put that many hours on your tractors, for instance, you can trade at, tier 0 in and then get into a tier 3 tractor, which is, exponentially, cleaner burning. There's a lot of creative ways that a lot of programs are out there to help. But again, those take dollars to do, and the state is not exactly in a great financial space right now to be going out and helping incentivize folks to make these kind of changes. The farmer program, which is the acronym for through CARB for how they fund a lot of these equipment replacements. It went from 100, I think it was 150 million or 125 million over 4 or 5 years, and then they thank God they put a placeholder in there. So we're hopeful that it's coming back in the future. And we're going to be working to make sure that it comes back in the future. But again, it's a really challenging budget environment. So, incentives are a fantastic way to get folks to make changes, whether it's, new boiler technology or microgrids and things like that. But we can't just do this when you're talking about thin margins. You can't just go out and invest hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars when that might be all you make, in a year or something like that. And you've got to kind of put that away for a rainy day when you turn around and are going to lose that equivalent amount of money and when the business cycle changes on you. And again, like I said, I think there's a lot of from the corporate side of things, from a lot of buyers, and there's a lot of push for sustainability and sustainable products from the consumer side. And so there's a lot of programs that are kind of incentivizing, whether it's on my own almond block, for instance, there's it's incremental dollars, but I mean, again, if I'm planting cover crop for pollinator habitat, or for soil health as well, or participating in like the California Almond Stewardship program, there's programs like that where they're giving you small incentives to participate in those kinds of things, and it does kind of help move the needle and encourage it, as long as it actually pays you to do those practices, and it pays agronomically to do those practices. Then I think farmers are willing to make those investments.
So to answer your original question, it is all of the above. I think the businesses that will survive into the future are the ones that take advantage of working with incumbents, working with the state, working with their existing partners, working with new partners to try to maximize the efficiencies and bolster their bottom line. Now, the unfortunate side effect of this is something that's been alluded to this morning, is the natural movement of maturing industries into oligopoly type situations. So it actually personally pains me to say this because my whole career, since I started as a young auditor at KPMG, I supported owner-managed businesses, entrepreneurial businesses. And I see how hard they work. I see them risking their homes and their health and time with their families to build businesses. But unfortunately, especially California agriculture, it is moving to a situation where only the top 2 or 3 players in an industry will survive, because the big have access to cheap financing. They have access to consultants. They have access to bringing in the most qualified talent, people that may not be good at multitasking and wearing multiple hats, but are really, really good at quality assurance, or really good at ERP implementation, or really good at finance. So that's unfortunately going to be the side effect of this drive for efficiency and drive for survival. But I want to end it on a positive note. The benefit of California is that we're the Golden State originally because they found gold here, but the gold today is the people of California. California continues to attract the best and brightest minds from not just here in California, not just from the United States, but from all over the world. And a lot of these people have the drive, the ambition, the entrepreneurial drive to innovate, to invent, to try new things. And even though the clients might be oligopolies, it is these young emerging companies that are trying new things, that are trying robotics, that are trying ERPs, that are trying using artificial intelligence for doing pistachio kernel sorting, which is currently a very manual and backbreaking work. Or using roboticized orchard pesticide and herbicide sprayers. It's those or that lift that we saw earlier for the stone fruit picking. I mean, that platform with the 5-point harness and with the sunshade, somebody built that machine. And I don't know who built that machine, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was a California company that put that together and didn't just pitch it. Okay, yes, there's benefits for people not getting hurt, we're reducing workers' compensation costs, but it generates an ROI, and it makes it easier to attract employees to do what used to be backbreaking work. I mean, my grandfather had an apple and pear orchard, and I remember as a 5 and 6-year-old picking apples and pears, and it was fun. Because, I did it until I was about 10 years old, and then I went down the finance route. But if I had to continue hand-picking apples and pears, my health and my mental state probably wouldn't have been as good. So these innovations in technology, and again, with the support of universities like UCSB, the phenomenal angel investing and venture capital ecosystem that exists in California. I mean, any young, bright mind in California will be given an opportunity to try out their idea, because there is definitely ample opportunity here for those new entrepreneurs that will revolutionize the world.
Thanks, Robert. So I think we have 15 or 20 minutes that we've reserved for audience Q&A. So I'd love to turn it over to you and to take advantage of this great opportunity to pick the brains of our panelists. Please go ahead.
You said the word ROI. Is there kind of a ballpark payback or ROI that management will approve these projects at?
So my boss and my company, we're a family-owned business. It's a husband and wife. They started the company, the processing plant about 20 years ago. And I come from a corporate background. I used to work for Dole Food Company and KPMG and so on and so forth. So the ROI that I've historically been used to is 20%. If something has a 5-year payback or a 20% annual return on investment, it's greenlit. My current boss is far more aggressive than that, and he loves to see a 6-month payback. Wow. And that makes things very, very challenging for me as their CFO. But what that's forced me to do, instead of me complaining and say, hey, boss, Dole Food Company, we worked with a 20% ROI. Well, I'd probably get my ass fired if I, said the way the other company did it. So what that's prompted me to do is to get creative, especially as I'm getting older, and I there's no way that I can keep on top of all the technologies and all the bright ideas that are out there. I just go out there and I ask for help. I ask for guidance. I meet people at conferences. I talk to the young people. I have a UCSB grad that's on my team, and I talk to them I read the Wall Street Journal religiously. I read The Economist religiously, and I talk to people and I ask for help. And I said, hey, what's going on? How can we survive for another generation? How can I boost the bottom line? there's a lot more that I don't know than I do know. So that's how I approach it. I just go out there and I just ask for ideas. And fortunately, because we are one of the larger companies, we really, really have an amazing group of employees and partners that I can run ideas by. And they will, in a matter of 5 or 10 minutes, tell me if something is viable or not. So the good news is, again, being in California, that really 80% of the non-real estate projects that that I propose have a less than 1 year payback, and that's being conservative.
And it's interesting to me because here we are at the IDE, and the assumption is that when you get bigger, you get more efficient, right? I mean, that's the story. Profit margins get smaller, the big guys consolidate, they get more efficient. As a smaller grower, I'm kind of trying to have 2 feet in different worlds here. I'm curious about what you guys think about in your respective industries. If you had smaller players, you guys represent huge industries. If you had smaller players in your industries, would that be a benefit to what you do, and would that be a benefit to how efficient your business is?
Well, let me just clarify the oligopolization. That's on the technology and manufacturing and processing side of, but on the land ownership, on owning the dirt and the water rights, I think the opposite holds true, because we have seen attempts by private equity and by large agricultural business enterprises to tie up, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of acres of land, expecting that they would get some of those efficiencies. But I think Olivier said earlier that the only way you get into agriculture is to be born in it or to marry into it. So the players, especially the PE people, I don't know how many people have been following closely what's been going on in the PE-backed agricultural world, but they're failing miserably, because you can't just waltz into agriculture with the risk tolerances of Wall Street and the risk tolerances of institutional investors and expect to survive. Because as everybody, or most people in this room know, in agriculture, you may have 10 years of famine, but then that 11th year of feast more than offsets the losses of the last 10 years. And that does not lend itself to Wall Street. That does not lend itself to, international capital markets. But for a family business, especially a multi-generational family business, it's they just have the intestinal fortitude to deal with it. Because again, they were either born into it or they, married into it. So yeah.
Yeah. Would any of the other panelists like to address this or the previous question about how investments are made? I want to make sure you have the opportunity as well.
I run a trade association that has both large and small farmers, so I'm not going to touch that with a 20-foot pole. But no, but I think the point is well taken, though. I mean, I think, like I said, you have to have the right perspective to be in farming, and it has to be a long-term perspective, because I mean, the pistachio thing is, I'm guessing, is probably going to be it might be more challenging, going forward, as there is a lot more acreage, and so you're going to have. You have to have that long-term perspective, and you have to have preserved capital, through the good years to get through the lean years. And we've kind of seen the folks that weren't able to do that, weren't able to preserve that capital, have not been able to withstand the storms of agriculture. So, and then those that, if you do have capital resources or borrowing capacity, that allows you to go in and make additional purchases. When times do get tough, there are opportunities to come in and buy, and expand your operation. So, like I said, farming's challenging, and you have to have the right perspective to be successful at it.
and then for me on that question, I'm just, if you go to that one large company, one large processor, I think you're going to lose something because, for myself, my ability to grow was to be in multiple factories across my career. So you're learning a lot more. It depends on the structure in each. You always have your continuous improvement out there. Again, it's going to be the connection that you have. So even in the role that I'm at, I'm reaching out to other California processors. I work directly with them. We share knowledge between us. We have that working relationship out there because it's important, or you're going to lose that out there again, and you won't be the best. We're not the best. It's working. Somebody's going to have a better idea out there, and it's exploring out there, putting those systems in place to get us to the next stage.
On the aggregation piece, I'm not the best person to ask. Our company's grown through acquisition. We are kind of one of these aggregators of smaller companies in a lot of ways. I do think though that there's, aside from the access to capital, lower investment, there are benefits to being large players, but one of the biggest benefits we've had from, acquiring a bunch of different companies is just on the data side, right? The information transfer side, right? We see in our space, every single truck that comes in and out of our warehouse, for instance, we know what all those customers are doing. We can identify places for efficiencies, right? All 3 customers are doing a third of a truckload. They're all going the same place on Wednesdays, right? We can tell them like, you should do that. And maybe that could be mimicked in a way, just from a communications perspective, from smaller players just talking to each other and sharing resources and information. But, I'm not an expert in agriculture. I think, so it's the data availability and insights and visibility, I think is a huge piece, in our industry. I hope it would be in your guys's. From the investment piece, we've had a lot of success aligning sustainability and value, right? And the first solar projects we did weren't because it was green. We would have been fired too, right? It's just, but you can find ways to, accurately and accurately model projects, mitigate the risk of projects. It requires a slightly deeper understanding. A lot of that's being privatized and available through companies that you might work with now. It's really easy to get underwater on projects if you don't fully understand them. That ability is getting better and better and easier and easier to access. And so I think that, from a investment standpoint, it's scary to spend money, but the better you understand that spend, the more successful it'll be and the more you can scale projects. And that's how we've been able to deploy so much solar, for example, but lots of other investments in sustainability and energy efficiency.
We have time for one more
One
question?
last question.
Please.
Yeah, the question was, we complained about some policies up here. Have there been policies or regulations that have been helpful in in promoting the clean energy transition? It's a good question. I mentioned the ITC earlier, the Infrastructure Reduction Act on a federal level. I think that's had a huge impact. Just it takes a 30% tax credit off, innovation projects.
I'll mention the obvious, but we have 3 awardees of Energy Commission grants. So some of the money that is taken away from your utility bill, or in the case of FPIP, there's some cap and trade money going through Air Resource Board. There are project money that's been helpful. You guys can talk about that. And on the federal versus state, I think there's still some gaps. So I'm sure Daniel will talk about that.
Sure. Were you done with your?
Yeah, no, I think, state incentive program. I mean, the SCHIP program, energy storage, there's just subsidies and not even just, dollars going towards it are fantastic too. And, we talk more about CEC grants, but just discounts, things that make it more approachable for people, I think have been fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I mean, anything that's going to improve your ROI makes it much, more desirable. So whether it's tax credits on the federal side or incentive dollars through the state side, those are all policies that are, that are going to encourage people to do that. And I would say those are the wins. I don't think you're ever going to find too many farmers that are going to say, well, yes, we need, this regulation has come along and, and help me. I'm from the government. I'm here to help is, an oxymoron for many reasons, right? So I don't know if there's policy, but I mean, I guess I would say that probably incentives are a form of policy that, and you kind of put your money where your mouth is as a state or federal government. And that helps benefit. I mean, we look at, we're talking about the state stuff, but I mean, the current farm bill that's, probably not going anywhere now with the change in Congress, coming up here, and change in administrations. But, there is a lot of money in there for like specialty crops, which benefits California specifically. And there's a lot of research dollars that's in this version of the farm bill. Research is really expensive. It's not like, I mean, even a company, size of some of the, like Primex or something like that. I mean, it's not like they have millions of dollars to be able to put, into, just doing research. So it takes universities and things like that, to take that, take those federal dollars and be able to, do things that are implementable across the industry, essentially. So those are the types of policies that are beneficial, I think.
Yeah, like we were saying, the direct tie on those initiatives, greenhouse gas initiatives, specifically going to our FPIPs. I mean, our project ourselves, you go to the ROI. It's a 1 to 3 year payback. You get the incentives, you get down to the one. Guess what? You're going to put that technology in quicker. So, yeah, it does help us focus sometimes. So some of those policies will drive those decisions out there.
The way I view government policy, especially in governments like the U.S. and California, I'm an immigrant, so I have a little bit of a different perspective than perhaps some U.S.-born people. But SpaceX gets all the glory, but it was federal funding that financed the space race and the Apollo missions and the moonwalk and so on and so forth. The electric cars, Tesla, nobody really talks about this much, but I believe the state of California invested between $5 and $6 billion into Tesla to get them started up. So government policy can be the catalyst, the incubator for new technologies. Artificial intelligence, computers, Velcro. Velcro was actually invented from a NASA program because they needed a way to secure things up in a zero gravity environment. Velcro nowadays, I mean, my 10-year-old still, I guess they don't teach them how to tie their shoes in elementary school. So a lot of the stuff he has is still Velcro. So my point is that with a relatively wise government, regardless of what level it is, federal, state, local, that if there is a system in place to invest in emerging technologies and emerging areas with no expectation of return, other than potential future payroll taxes or property taxes or income taxes, it can serve a huge purpose. I mean, the pistachio industry started in California because of political instability in Iran. Iran used to be the dominant pistachio grower and exporter worldwide because the pistachio tree evolved in Iran. But because of government instability there, all the pistachio farmers fled Iran, and they saw that the conditions in California were comparable to the conditions in Iran. So they brought some seed over from Kerman and Yazd and the pistachio growing regions in Iran. And guess what? They didn't work. But because California and the universities and federal state funding, it's an innovative state. Guess what? They developed varieties that did, stick in California. And this will be probably a shock to most people, but California pistachios are cheaper on the global market than Iranian pistachios. And you say, well, how can that be? The average farmer or a farm worker in California makes, $50,000 to $80,000 a year. The average salary in the agricultural areas in Iran is probably $300-400 a month, maybe $1,000 a month. Well, it's through innovation, increased yields, better water management, automation, logistics, supply chain, input costs, and obviously the efforts of the trade agencies on lowering tariffs, and that ecosystem is what keeps California at the forefront.
one more minute. Yeah, sorry. I did think of something else too. It's not a regulatory policy necessarily, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about rate design, in terms of utilities and how we pay for energy. It's sort of a personal topic for me, but the more that they can reflect true conditions of stress, I think the more incentives that they're giving businesses to behave a certain way, the better off everyone ends up being, because businesses will adapt and find ways to optimize, right? So like, the duck curve that we saw earlier today, the basic TOU time of use schedule of the way we buy energy doesn't necessarily perfectly reflect that, right? There is a peak time that does cover a big part of the duck curve. But if you go to somewhere like Texas, there's all kinds of different problems with the way they organize their market, but at least they're giving true magnitude of price signal that reflects grid stress. And, if you're going to invest in things that are, basically meant to take meat off the bone, right? Optimize your operations, optimize your spend, increase efficiency. Those things pay off better when you have more, room to play with, more variance to play with. Nobody wants to see higher prices at any given time of the day, but if there is a obvious time where you benefit, for not using energy, and another time where you benefit from using it, and the higher, that differential is, I think that also incentivizes a lot more investment and behavioral change in industry.
Thank you very much to this panel. I'm sensing that we need to move on in our program. So before we do that, let's please give a quick round of applause to our panelists. And I'm going to turn it over to Olivier.
Thanks, Eric, for doing a great job with this complex problem. And we learned a lot from the processes of natural gas and electricity. It's not just one thing. If you want to learn more during lunch about 2035 Initiative, Eric and a few other people are here. At this time, I want to acknowledge a couple of growers we work with. So we have Robert Abbott, and it's a local avocado grower over here. He's going to have a stand with freshly picked avocados and guacamole. We got to know Robert through a couple of people, but we did a Southern California Edison pilot project with him. So he's at the lower scale of Central Coast, very innovative. So please try his avocados. You're also at the farmer's market every week. So if you guys want to be engaged in food and ag locally, please talk to him.
I picked like 200 avocados for you guys, but you can't force nature, and only like 30 of them ripened up. So I don't know, get in line first.
Perfect. And then outside, we did a project with PG&E with a really good winery. If you drive north and go through Arroyo Grande, on the right side, you'll see Leticia Vineyards. I don't know if anybody of you have done that. They have really good Pinots, so we have some bottles outside. And if you want to know more about the project, Kevin Langham, who worked on it, can answer, or me as well. So we have two local growers. They're about, 50 acres in Carpinteria, Robert, roughly?
Yeah.
And I think Leticia has like 300 acres, 200 acres on the coast. Yeah. So please make a stop at the local stand. They have great wine, great avocados, and you'll be able to be more engaged. So have a great lunch. It's outside, and we'll be back in an hour. Thank you.